Hello and welcome to the second episode of Stranger News. Let's get right back into it. As you can see, I moved up in life. I changed the setting. Apparently, the setting of my first video wasn't sufficient enough for some of my 6 viewers. And so I decided to move up in life and decided to move up to the second floor. Now, let's just jump right into it with our first bit of today. Special news from Japan. So Saya Mito from the Nara Women's University in Japan, she found out that slugs, sea slugs to be specific, off the coast of Kagoshima Prefecture have the ability to regrow their body if their head is severed. And the story is quite funny because she just walked in one day into her little lab and saw that the slugs were severed. Their heads were chopped off. She thought it was an evil trick by one of her friends. Apparently, the sea slugs in Japan just randomly decide to sever their heads. It's a defense mechanism, like with many other worms, that if they're under attack and half of their body gets chewed up by some other predator, they have the ability to regrow their original to their original state. Interesting part about the story is one bit from the article, which is from Sora News 24. Mito, whose research was published this week, was able to feed her slug head that was probably just like floating around. She was able to actually feed that slug head some seaweed, and it was able to eat that seaweed without actually having a functioning heart because that heart was severed, which is very, very strange. About a week after that, traces of a new body and working heart began to develop. So it only took about a week for the sea slug to regrow vital organs of its body. I have no idea how a sea slug is able to survive without its organs, but apparently it is. By the 3rd week, the slug's body was nearly complete again. So it essentially takes less than a month for the sea slug to grow itself a new body. I don't know what to say. So let's move to the next article. Wild boar falls through a mall ceiling in 2015 in Hong Kong. I know that this bit is very, very old. However, it's very hard to find strange news out of Asia, surprisingly. I suppose there's not a lot of news outlets that actually talk about these things. However, it's a very, very interesting story. I think it's hilarious. So basically, a wild boar fell through a ceiling of a children's clothing store in Hong Kong on Sunday. It's not clear how the boar got into the mall apparently, but BBC says that the boar apparently made it into the ceiling by climbing up a ladder in the back room of the shop. So the boar apparently, and this is what BBC says, this is what surprises me the most. I've never seen a boar climbing any type of ladder. I haven't seen any animal except maybe a monkey that is able of climbing up a ladder. But apparently this boar climbed up a ladder and then ended up in the ceiling of that certain mall in the clothing department and fell through the ceiling. It punched through a corner of the false ceiling onto an elevated display case, then proceeded to ham it up in the store, knocking over a few mannequins in the process, according to BBC. Maybe the boars in the rest of the world are different. I've never ever heard of any boar doing something like that. My parents actually live in Sardinia. The boars there are quite simple. So let's move on to the next article. This article basically talks about a Chinese woman who was unfortunately born with her feet backwards. And the article states, a woman in Chongqing, China has vowed to move forward in life despite being born with backwards feet. However, the doctors initially felt Wang's condition would prevent her from walking ever. So the doctors, the specialists, they thought she would never be able to walk again. It's basically physically impossible for her to walk with backwards feet. However, she says now, years later as an adult, that she can run faster than most of her friends, and she has a regular job as a waitress in the family restaurant. There's no reason to class me as disabled, so she doesn't even see herself as disabled. She said, according to the Mirror again, I can walk as well as anyone else and even run faster than them. I'm like everyone else, except of course that I put my shoes on backwards. So now the part I didn't understand. So basically, I took this article from two sources, from Huffington Post and from the Mirror. And the one part I did not really quite understand in this article itself is, did she run backwards? If her feet are backwards? This is the one part that I'm a little bit confused about. Maybe I'm able to find some footage, I don't know. But you know, I don't want to sound ignorant, but she probably still runs forward somehow. I need to find the footage for this. Move on to my next article. So this is, I'm gonna call it yard sale gone good. It's one of those typical things that happen where basically a yard sale customer bought a Chinese looking porcelain from a yard sale for $35. You know, nobody expected this obviously to be something. However, it turns out that this piece of bowl is from the 15th century from China. And it's a super antique artifact. It's worth up to $500,000. The article quotes, appraisers determined it dates back to the Ming Dynasty of the early 1400s and estimated its worth at between $300,000 and $500,000. So basically, this item is from the Ming Dynasty. So that is incredible. This is such a rare artifact to find. Whoever sold it for $35 is probably going to kill himself. The funniest part about all of this is there's actually so many channels. There's so many TV channels that have shows that are specialized in yard sales, flea market sales. They go to thrift stores, or you know that show where there's containers that they can buy where they find like random stuff, and sometimes it's super rare, sometimes it's not. But even if they find something that is super rare in that show or in those shows, because there's so many of them, I'm pretty sure that every country around the world has their own version of that show. It's only going to be worth, what, $3,000 to $5,000 or something. Like the craziest thing I've ever seen was probably around $9,000. Some random person went up to a yard sale, they bought something or they found something unintentionally for $500,000. This basically, you know, why do we even have these shows? Why do they even exist if a random person does a better job than apparently professionals that have been doing it for 40 years? I don't know, I think it's hilarious. Let's move on to our next little bit. Article that we're going to talk about is actually a very, very old story that happened in March 2012. However, over the years, there have been some developments to the story. The story started off with a burglary. So someone broke into someone's house. They could never prove who it was. I don't think anyone was ever injured. The article never really talked about it. However, the funniest thing is the article states that the German police say they have solved a 9-year-old burglary after DNA found on a half-eaten piece of sausage mashed out of a man detained in France over an unrelated crime. It gets better. It gets better, trust me. So the next bit is, police in the western town of Schwerin, which is in Germany, said Thursday that the sausage belonged to the victim and the suspect. A 30-year-old Albanian citizen appeared to have helped himself to a bite during the March 2012 break-in. Okay? So 9 years later, they figured this out. Imagine the situation. You're about to break into someone's house. You're a professional criminal, right? You do burglaries for a living. You break into people's homes all the time. And so you break in, you know, you steal some stuff, and then you see that nice looking little hot dog, you know, that sausage sitting on the table, and you just can't resist. You can't resist that sausage. So what you do is, because you're so hungry, you're famished after all this breaking in and stealing stuff, you know, it's very exhausting. So what you do is you take a bite from that sausage, okay? Not even thinking that your DNA might be all over this and the DNA of the victim. 9 years later, they solve the case and find out that this guy is already in custody in France. However, the funniest bit of the entire story is that they can't even follow up on the crime, or they can't even extradite him back to Germany to prosecute him, because the crime basically expired. I didn't know that existed, where crimes can expire, and after they expire, there's literally you're a free man. Apparently, after a certain amount of years, it's not relevant anymore, and you can just do whatever you want. It is still shocking to me to see that such a thing could happen, that someone can break into your home, and even if it's 10 years later or 20 years later, you find out who it is, you finally know who's the criminal, and then you can't even get him prosecuted. But yes, this is basically the final article. With this, we're coming to our conclusion of our second episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And please always feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any other interesting stories. Maybe you have your own strange news that happened to you that you want to share with the world. Again, thanks for watching. Have a great night.